Alright, today I wanted to talk about fittings in general, and more specifically about the fitting I use with the Hookbill I've flown for a few of my videos in the past. Um, I'm going to run through the slot layout from low to high to rigs, low, medium, high rigs, and I'll explain why exactly I'm using each individual module that's fit to this ship. Before I get into that, I just wanted to kind of highlight why I'm using this ship. This particular character of mine has a very strong background in Caldari hulls in general, but more specifically shield and missile fit ships. And I've just always enjoyed them because missiles and rockets are very easy to use in combat. You don't have to worry about anything crazy like tracking and optimal ranges. You just have to be concerned about whether or not you're within range to hit a target. So it's pretty simple in that regard. I like shields more so than armor because when you're active shield tanked, you can react. The shield boosters react faster than armor, whereas with armor reps you have to kind of anticipate damage. Um, and uh, you also can just get more. You lose utility when you fit shield, but you get more damage, and vice versa. So that all being said, let's focus more on the fitting here. I so the Hookbill is a pretty good ship, pretty well rounded, especially with this fit. I was surprised when I started poking around with it. Um, so the background behind this particular fit itself is people in my corporation, people in my alliance have been flying Federation Navy Comets for a while, and they use uh, Microwarpdrive fit, dual web, Scram, Ancillary repped ones as quote unquote pursuit comets to catch kiting ships when kiting ships were a problem for us in the area of space we lived in. So I thought that was cool, and then I thought, okay, well, I don't really fly blaster fit ships. I fly, missile ships. So what can I do to kind of, have my own flavor, my own variant of the ship that they've been flying? So I started looking at the Hookbill because it is the faction ship parallel to the Federation Navy Comet. And I was able to pretty quickly and easily adapt things over, and I have been since then pleasantly surprised with the results. It turned into quite it. It's an extremely fun ship to fly, and it takes a pretty good amount of skill to manage everything on it, I would say. Um, it's also pretty forgiving, and I'll kind of touch on why as I talk through the modules. But it's the most fun I've had flying a frigate in EVE Online. It's not some kitey bullshit where you just orbit at 20 kilometers and just whittle away at a target. It's not some crazy slugfest where you just try to keep at range from a target and uh, maybe manage your own tank, although that really is kind of what it is. But there's bits and pieces to this ship that make it more fun to fly than some of the other stuff I've seen. And so I guess what I'll do here is I'll start getting into how the ship is fit and why it's fit this way. A quick note, I'm using simulation mode in Eve just to kind of show visually what's going on. My skills aren't perfect, but they're kind of close for some of this stuff. So you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like with max skills just by looking at this here. I'm just going to eyeball it over here in PIFA. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty close to perfect. So let's let's dive right in and start with the lows. I'm just gonna so again, uh, this fit turned out to be pretty close to perfect. Everything on here you can see is active, except for the damage control, and everything is extremely slot efficient, space efficient for what it's doing. So let's start it off with the small ancillary armor repairer in the lows. It's an armor repairer. You wouldn't really expect that to see that on a shield fit ship. That's because this Hookbill isn't necessarily a shield fit ship. It's kind of tri-tanked. It's got the armor repair, a shield repair, and some hull tank mixed in. But with heat, uh, the small ancillary armor repair here gives me about 2.3k EHP, so effective hit points. So as long as I'm pulsing that at the right times, as long as I'm repairing my armor efficiently throughout the course of a fight, I will add effectively 2,300 effective hit points to my ship. To put that into perspective, a buffer fit Kestrel, which is pretty common for people starting off in faction warfare, or it could be common. A buffer fit Kestrel has about 6,000 EHP. So this ancillary armor repair gives me 1/3 of that just in a single module. The penalty here is it uses capacitor as I use it, but since I don't have any energy warfare stuff going on, like neutralizers. Once I'm brawling with somebody, my Microwarpdrive won't be running. So I don't have a lot of stuff. The Scram and the dual webs use energy, and that's it. So most of the rest of my capacitor can be dedicated to the ancillary armor repair. So circling back, the armor repair gives me effective hit points, and it helps with bait tanking versus certain enemies. Oh no, you've lost your shields. Oh no, you're in low armor. So the enemy, if they see that, they'll want to try to stay and fight you, and they'll take more risks. They'll stay around a little longer if they're, in low armor, if they're in, half structure, but they see, oh, they're going down as well. You're going down as well. They might stay and fight and try to, finish slugging it out. In which case, you can, wait till you get into structure and then you start repping armor, and that's when they're like, oh, okay, shit, I lost this one, because you'll just continue to tank everything they've got with that 2.3 thousand EHP. So it helps with bait tanking. Moving on, the damage control. A damage control gives you resists across the board, shield, armor, and hull. In this case, that helps with a lot of stuff, but mostly it helps with the hull tanking. When it is offline, the ship has 33% resists across the board. You can see that here. And when I online it, they jump up to close to, jump up to 57 across the board. So it almost doubles my resists in hull tanking. And that mixed with the two bulkhead rigs, which I'll talk about later, they give me more effective hit points in my structure, in my hull, which allows me, it just helps improve the overall buffer. The damage control adds, with the rigs, it adds about 1000 EHP to the ship for structure alone. And then there's about maybe another 200 or so in buffer hit points in armor and shields that it gets to. So it helps increase the overall tankiness of the ship. It also boosts how much I get out of these ancillary modules. it's kind of standard for it used to be a standard for ships across the board before ships had the natural 33% resist. Now that that's the case, you don't necessarily see damage controls on ships like shield tanked ships, uh, but you will see them on ships. You will always see them on ships that are buffer fit for structure, hull tanked ships, and you'll probably see them on a lot of armor ships because they have to react to damage they're taking with armor repairs and um, just a couple of other things like that. Because of that, it's better for them to have damage control. That way, if something goes wrong and they start, like the enemy's eaten through their armor and they start bleeding structure, they don't want to bleed structure too quickly. So, oh no, they blew through my armor. Now I'm taking hull damage while I'm trying to cycle my armor repairer. And having a damage control helps uh, give you more time to get armor reps. So that's that. Um, Moving on, we'll start talking about the mids. I'm gonna go top to bottom here. The Warp Scrambler is pretty standard in PvP. It has it prevents targets from warping off. A Scrambler, and I will just talk to the difference between a Scrambler and a Warp Disruptor real quick. A Warp Scrambler will shut off a target's Microwarpdrive if they have one on, or a Micro Jump Drive if it's like a battleship or something like an industrial or whatever. Battle cruisers too. So Scramblers are effective if you want to hold a target down, and they're very effective for brawling ships because they turn off micro warp drives. That's pretty much it. So PvP ship, bit of scram. Webs. Okay, so the first web that I fit to this ship will allow me to slow a target down. It also allows for range dictation in brawling fights. So if I'm within web range of a target, I will. They'll probably have me webbed as well if they're also a brawler. But this allows me to slow a target down so that I can kind of control how far away from them I am. So if I'm webbing up a blaster fit ship that for some reason doesn't have a web itself, I can keep it at range from me, stay 6-7 kilometers away from it, and it won't be able to hit me at all with blasters, but I'll be able to hit it with my rockets, and I'll get into that later too. So the webs allow for range dictation. They allow, they slow targets down. They also help to catch kiting ships. If you manage to slingshot a kiting ship within web range, and webs get more range if you heat them, so that's something to take into consideration too. They go from 10 kilometers to 13 kilometers. So if you heat webs and you're trying to like slingshot uh, a kiting ship and you manage to get them to come within 13 kilometers of you, you can then slow them down, catch them, scram them, dual web them, web them down, scram them, and then proceed to just kill them because they're a kiting ship and you're a brawling ship and you manage to catch them. The second web in on this particular fit has it adds a lot more bonuses on top of the first web. It helps with range dictation versus afterburner fit ships, specifically ships that are fit with a single web and an afterburner, because an afterburner kind of, in a way, nullifies a web. So the second web helps with range dictation versus afterburner fit ships. It also helps with damage application for these rockets that I have fit. So, Rage Rockets, that's the ammo I'm using. They're higher DPS, but they fly at shorter range and they have poorer application to targets that are moving. But if you dual web a target, they're not moving, and so the rockets apply very well. Uh, the dual webs also allow for easier escape in bad situations. So if you're if you're fighting somebody and then it turns out that, oh, they were bait tanking me, I've been had, oh no, um, you can then try to pull away from them and maybe get outside of scram range and either use a micro warp drive, like a heated micro warp drive cycle, to really pull range away from them, or just warp off. However you want to do it. Um, if you manage to somehow hold somebody outside of scram range, yeah, you use the second web to decide whether you want to stay or go in a fight. Is essentially what it boils down to. The micro warp drive here, which is a compact one, enables this ship to chase other ships pretty easily. Right now, I have a 3 km a second speed, 4.3 with heat. And so 3 km, 4.3 kilometers, that's pretty fast. And that combined with the heated webs, the 13 km engagement envelope, really allows you to catch anything you want, right? There's not a lot that you won't be able to keep up with that. So, it allows you to chase kiting ships. The micro warp drive gives you an increased level of control on the field. For example, in a previous video, I had managed to string out a group of 5 neutrals that I was fighting. So I had just burned away from where they were warping in at, and the micro warp drive allowed me to really burn away from them. So it meant that it took some of their slower ships longer time to get to me, and allowed me to fight some of them on my terms, and by extension, it allowed me to fight all of them on my terms. So the micro warp drive allows you to get away from situations you don't want to be in, and it allows you to get into situations you do want to be in. It can make escape easier. You're not gonna get away from a target that's got you scrammed with the micro warp drive. You better hope that the dual webs will protect you there. But if you're being warp disrupted by a target, you can slingshot them pretty easily with the micro warp drive. Like if they're too fast for you, like if they're a high grade snaked Garmer or some crap like that, you can probably slingshot them if you're careful. You just need to kind of work on how you're going to do that, and you can either I think I might break it out a little bit in the slingshotting video, but there's other guides out there too for slingshotting. So that's the tackle modules and the prop module. The last module in the mid slots is the medium ancillary shield booster. So I talked about the ancillary armor repair. Right now, the armor repair is filled with nanite repair paste. It uses charges every time it cycles. Once the ancillary armor repair runs out of nanite repair paste, it also uses a capacitor. Once it runs out of nanite, it can continue to cycle, but it will not repair nearly as much armor as it would with nanite. That being said, it will still continue to repair armor. The shield boosters behave a little differently. The shield boosters give you a lot of, they'll boost your shields in exchange for these charges. But once the shield boosters do not use capacitor, first and foremost. They don't use cap while there are charges in the shield booster. Once the shield booster has run out, though, if you cycle it again before it goes into reload, it will use 60% of your capacitor. So there may be some times where you want to do that, where you might be trying to shield tank and you're just like, okay, well, I'll let it eat a ton of my capacitor for this extra burst of, you see it here, 146 hit points. shield hit points, which based on the resists are different amounts of effective hit points, or you can let it go into reload. And both of these ancillary repairs have 60-second reload times, so it can take a little while. Usually what I end up doing is I'll try to alternate between the two, like especially in a drawn out fight, I'll let my shields get low, and then I'll start kind of shield boosting to let it hover around 30%. But once the shield boosters run out, that's when I definitely start running the armor repairer while the shield booster is recharging or reloading. Um, One other thing to note, shield booster and both of the ancillary repairers, they give you more effective hit points back, 15% more to be specific, if you run them heated. So always make sure that even if you cycle them once, it's a heated cycle because you'll get more hit points out of them that way. Um, so yeah, again, touching on both of these allow you to. They give you a lot of effective hit points. I forgot to mention this is about 2,000 shield EHP on top of the 2,300 you get out of the armor. So that's 4.3 thousand EHP in the ancillary repairs. Well, actually, it's about 2,200 here. So 4.5 thousand EHP in shield and armor for active repairing, and that's on top of the 5.2k EHP that the ship itself has. One quick note, I'm reading these numbers off of IFFA, which is something I have up on my other screen, the Python Fitting Assistant. I have this open so I can kind of gesture at things, and so you've got something to look at as I'm talking to it, but a lot of these numbers don't necessarily... There's different math used for the EHP in-game and the EHP calculations out of game, so I'm just quoting the ones in PyFA. Okay, so that's mid slots. Moving on to high slots. Oh, one one final thing, one final note about the mid slots. This ship is a it's a Scram dual web fit Microwarpdrive fit ship. So it's a brawler. It fights within brawling range, within Scram range, but it is dual web plus Microwarpdrive fit. There is one type of most ships. This ship can dictate range against most ships, but there is one type that it will not, and that it will probably lose against depending on the fit, and that is a dual web afterburner fit brawling ship. If another ship manages to catch you, and this is usually like blaster boats like Incursuses and Comets, if a if a comet catches you and it happens to be dual web and afterburner fit, it will be able to its webs nullify your webs. You're both slowed down by the same effective percent, but the afterburner allows it to just burn straight at you. And because your micro warp drive fit and he'll have you scrammed, you won't be able to dictate range. So in that case, you just need to focus on everything else because range control is kind of a wash in that type of a fight. So that's that. Circling up to the rockets. Rockets are what the Hookbill hull is bonus to. Um, kinetic specifically, but one thing to note, there are certain Caldari ships that are kinetic locked, which means that they only get bonuses to Scourge weapons, Scourge missiles and everything. The Hookbill gets a 25% bonus to kinetic, but also a 20% bonus to EM, explosive, and thermal. What that equates to is per level, so if you have Caldari Frigate 5, that gives you a 125% bonus to kinetic damage and a 100% bonus to the other types of damage. So It's not a huge decrease in damage if you choose a different ammo type from kinetic, and sometimes it can be really beneficial, like using Mjolnir versus Caldari hulls and using Nova versus Galente hulls. Specifically, those are EM and explosive damage types, respectively. Uh, so you can change up the damage types if you so choose. It's not a huge deal. Um, okay, so rockets. This ship is bonused to rockets, so it's fit with rockets. It can only fit launchers. It can't fit turrets. So we have rocket launchers fit. I choose rockets rather than missiles because rockets have lower fitting requirements, and they have the effective range that happens to be the same engagement envelope we have given to us by our scram and our webs. A heated warp scrambler will give us a 9 kilometer scram range, and the webs have a 10 kilometer range, so we want to fight our target within those 10 kilometers, ideally. With my skills, my rockets, my rage rockets specifically, have a 12 kilometer range, which is, well within that. It's it our engagement envelope is contained within the weapon application bubble. So my weapons, the rockets will apply to any target within those 12 kilometers. So they will apply to any target I am currently fighting that I'm shooting at. Um, the rockets also have, decent DPS. The rockets have higher DPS than missiles. Missiles have a decent alpha strike, but low DPS. So, to kind of touch all this again, rockets are easier to fit. They have the more appropriate ranges and higher DPS when compared to missiles. It's kind of pretty straightforward for this haul. Moving on to rigs now. I use a Calefaction rig, a Tech 2 Calefaction rig, and 2 Tech 1 Transverse bulkheads. So the Calefaction, this boosts the damage dealt by rockets. I think specifically for me, it gives me about an 8 DPS increase. And then the 2 bulkhead rigs give me a decent amount of hull EHP. I'm just going to check this stuff in PIFA real quick. Oh, I said 8 for that. I was mistaken. That was based on some comparisons I was doing earlier, and I'll talk about those in a second. The Calefaction rig here, the Tech 2 Calefaction, actually gives me a 23 DPS increase without heated. It buffs my rocket damage up quite a bit, is the highlight here, by about 20 something DPS, which is incredibly useful to have in a slugfest. The 2 bulkhead rigs increase my hull EHP by about 750, so they give me a nice little buff in just, my bait tanking buffer. So if you remember, again, shields will kind of eat shit through shields. Same thing with armor, but we can kind of alternate between the two. But as we're reloading the shield repper or the armor repper, we'll start bleeding structure, and having more structure hit points will kind of help us live through that part as we get more of that back. Um, One final note here. With these rigs, you can choose Tech 1 or Tech 2 to taste. I personally prefer a Tech 2 Calefaction with Tech 1 not Trimarks, Tech 1 bulkheads, because the Calefaction gives you that 8 DPS increase that I was talking about earlier over a Tech 1 Calefaction. and that 8 DPS will help you speed up fights. It'll increase your odds against active tanked ships, and it will also increase your odds against groups of enemies. So if you catch one enemy and then his buddies are trying to come to save him, it is better for you to kill him faster. Generally speaking, it's better for you to kill a ship faster than it is for you to have more hit points for the enemy ship to chew through. But you can go with a Tech 1 Calefaction and switch these to Tech 2. If you do switch these to Tech 2, the only thing you really get is an extra 200 effective hit points in your hull. So it can help with survivability, but so can winning the DPS race. Uh, so that's kind of it. I've touched on kind of what all of these do, and one thing you'll notice is that every module fitted to this ship has a very unique purpose. And without it, all of the other components would kind of fall apart. If I don't have the scram, boom, I just lose fights because my targets will always get away. If I didn't have the dual webs, I wouldn't be able to control range in a brawl, meaning the enemy would just be able to apply their damage perfectly, or they would just be able to get away from me. If I didn't have the Microwarpdrive, I wouldn't be able to catch certain targets or control certain fights, or engage certain targets to begin with. If I didn't have the damage control, a lot of my tank would just be out the window. If I didn't have these two active tanking modules, I wouldn't have double my ship's effective hit points plus whatever I've got in cargo. And if I didn't have these rigs, the rigs play to the strengths of the ship, specifically the buffer tanking that we're doing plus the raw damage that it's doing to begin with. So that's pretty much it. It's a solid, well-rounded fit. I've grown to love it. Like, again, I mentioned in the beginning, I started flying this very recently, and I wish I'd been flying it for a lot longer. It's relatively cheap, especially if the cost of small ancillary armor repairs ever manages to go down. Um, which, who knows? We'll see long term. But apart from that, the fit itself is pretty nice. So I would recommend trying it if you're bored of flying whatever ships you're flying, and if you have decent skills with really just with if you have Caldari Frigate 5 and you have decent missile skills, decent rocket skills, I would just recommend trying this because a lot of the other stuff isn't even skill intensive. Um, it's all just there. It's on the hull, really. So hopefully you try it, and hopefully you have good results, and hopefully you've learned something, a little something about fittings as I talked through all of this. Have a good one.